Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing another episode of Jurassic World Evolution 2 Mod Spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and compare them to their real life fossil counterparts. So today we're on part 91, so we're creeping up to 100. I know game support is pretty much officially finished, so it'll be very interesting to how much we can get before Jurassic World Evolution 3 comes out. So I'm quite interested to see what's going to happen there. But yeah, got a quite interesting assortment today. We've actually got a mammal today, which is quite cool, but we've also got a really cool variety of dinosaurs. So we're going to be starting off today with Chocolate's Beipiaosaurus. So that's been a remaster, so I'll go quickly over that one. Let's let that one walk out of that. I want to have a look at that one because it probably actually fits the colours the best. Just get out of the shadows. Come on, mate. Why are you being so shadowy? There we are. So this is Beipiaosaurus, a really cool animal. So Beipiaosaurus is a genus of therizinosaurid theropod, so it is related to things, like Therizinosaurus and Ornithorhynchus, and as we'll get into. And it lived in China during the early Cretaceous in the Yixian Formation, which is a very famous formation, has all sorts of really cool fossils, like that well-preserved Psittacosaurus is a great example. The first remains were found in 1996, and then were officially described in 1999. And this was from before the discovery of Uranus. Beipiaosaurus is actually among the heaviest dinosaurs with direct evidence of feathers. So that's quite cool. And is known from 3 reported specimens we'll get into. So in terms of discovery, in 1996, the peasant Li Zhejiang discovered a partial skeleton of the dinosaur near the village of Sitan, which is from the lower beds of the Yixian Formation, and a single individual. And then on May 27th, 1999, it was described as Beipiaosaurus inspecticus, named by Zhejiang, Tai Jiahun, and Wang Zhilin, with the name Beipiaosaurus meaning to Beipiao lizard, which is the Beipiao, which is the city it was near, it was where it was found, and Expecticus, which means unexpected or surprising. So the holotype, as you mentioned, was found recovered in the geosciano beds of the Yixian Formation in Liaoning Province, China, and these were dated to the Aptian stage of the early Cretaceous, so about 125 million years ago. And this fossil is housed in Beijing. The Institute of Vertebrate and Paleontology and Paleoanthropology in Beijing. It consists of a partial subatult skeleton that is very gesticulated, but a significant number of these bones have been recovered, so we do know quite well. There was another specimen that actually preserves their unique feathers as well. Well, they did show the plumage, but another one shows the more details of the plumage. Significant covering of unique elongated feathers, and it actually includes complete skulls with a scleric ring, which is in the eyes and things like that, so it is quite well. But then there's also a third specimen that has been found, which is a partial individual with a badly crushed skull and traces of feather and integument. So all 3 specimens had some evidence of feathers, which is quite cool. So as I mentioned, Beipiaosaurus is a small therizinosaur, measures about 2.2 meters long, about 7 feet long, and before, as I mentioned, the discovery of Uranus is considered the largest dinosaur with direct evidence of being feathered. It was estimated to weigh about 27 kilograms based on femur length. And very interesting, most advanced therizinosaurids, like Therizinosaurus, had 4 functional toes. But the feet of Beipiaosaurus had reduced inner toes, showing that this derived therizinosauric condition may have evolved from a 3-toed therizinosaur ancestor, so that's likely representing the facial condition. Its head was also relatively large relative to other therizinosaurs, with its lower jaw actually being the same length as the femur, and his neck was also considered a lot shorter, so it's considered quite early, so it hasn't quite got those big features, And in actually 2003, there was a Pycno style, which is fused vertebrae in the tail, that most birds have, but pretty much all birds have. But some dinosaurs had it too, including Beipiaosaurus. So that actually was described and actually suggested the origin of the Pycno style was not linked to having pennaceous feathers. So that's quite interesting. So we always talk about the feathers and colour. So the first feather impressions were found in the holotype, which was soft, slender, filamentous feathers on the left arm, covered like a downy feathers, similar to those Sinosauropteryx as well. But actually, they looked at these in a more kind of intermediate between Sinosauropteryx, like almost like hair, and then more advanced feathers as well. And there's also, as I mentioned, the tail was covered in feathers with partial filaments. They were about 4 to 7 centimeters long and about 1.5 millimeters long in width, without a trace of pennaceous feathers, as indicated by the preserved Pycno style. And also unique among theropods, they see a secondary coat of much longer, simpler feathers, which is quite interesting as well. That was on the torso, head, and neck, which is quite cool as well. And they're called the elongated broad filamentous feathers, or the EBFFs. And they are different from other feathers by having a single unbranching branch filament. And most other primitive feathered dinosaurs typically have down-like feathers with potentially 2 or more filaments. But this actually is quite a unique, different style of feather. And they're obviously not used for flight because these guys didn't have no pennaceous wing feathers or big flight feathers. It was more probably just to keep them warm. And they were definitely not for flight. And they also did some research into the colour. So being able to look at the shape and colour, the shape of the melanosomes in these animals, they actually put them under an electron microscope. And they actually found the colour dinosaurs tend to be slightly correlated with their physiology. So while some species of living reptiles, which are endotherms, have left diversity in the shape of the melanosomes and colour range, some maniraptorans, birds and mammals, which are endothermic, tend to be more colourful in the melanosomes. And it seemed these guys actually were a brownish coloration, like those of modern reptiles, and maybe brownish reddish colours. So that's quite cool there. And originally, like, the affinities of Therizinosaurus were actually quite interesting. So they originally were thought to be early sauropodomorphs, or even Ordishkians, but now they're considered to be, Maniraptorans, or related to Maniraptorans, the theropods, Slorosaurs. And Beipiaosaurus was first assigned to Therizinosauria in 1999, and then has even been considered the most basal member. So most evidence suggests, is it the most basal member, so it's a Therizinosauridia. So it is related to things like Falcaris and Jinchangsaurus, which is quite cool. In terms of paleobiology, as I mentioned, we looked at these colours, which is quite cool. They analysed them at all. And then looking at these skin flakes to show that these guys were rich in keratin, and they looked at several bird taxa that have found that they had similar cell structures to modern birds, which is quite cool, that they did not get as warm as modern birds. So they likely didn't quite, they had a little bit more fat as well to help, better regulate their body temperature. And they did not get as warm as modern birds because they were ground dwelling and not able to fly, so they didn't get quite as warm. In addition, as well, they actually found that non-avian dinosaurs shed skin in the same way birds and mammals do, unlike many reptiles that will shed a single piece or several large pieces. They shed their skin as dandruff like modern mammals and birds. So that's a little bit we know about dinosaurs now, which is quite cool. And in terms of the environment it was living in, it was a very interesting environment. The paleo environment of the Ixian Formation had several climate fluctuations or seasonal fluctuations. So it was warm and humid, then punctuated by dry seasons, and then the environment would become more arid. The average yearly temperature was about 10 degrees or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, with relatively cool winters. And a study by Wu et al. Has found that the effects of the orbital focusing caused a shift in the Earth axis would have contributed to this. And the Ixian Formation is actually quite well known. It's got a really famous specimens of dinosaurs. It has the Tyrannosaurs, Dilong and Utaranus, Dromaeosaurs, Sinorthosaurus, Oviraptorosaurs such as Cardipteryx, Compsognathans like Sonocolpteryx, Confucianus and Psittacosaurus, and things like that. So it's a very rich formation with lots of other smaller animals as well, subtropical to temperate. So lots of ferns, cycads, and all sorts of small insects and fish and shrimp and things like that. So it's a very rich formation. Also a lot of mammals and birds and things like that. So it was quite a rich formation, and also lizards. Quite rich environment. So yeah, quite cool. Love these guys. Quite a cute little cutie. So we'll let him run off and do his thing. So next up, we've got by Netraptor, we have got a really cool dinosaur. We've got Hesperosaurus. So there's a really, really cool one there. Really, actually do love how it's come out. Looks really, really nice. So let's have a look at you. Oh, no, and it does that. Of course it does. There's one that looks quite nice. I'll stick with you. Why not? Because you got your blue. No, nothing wrong with good blue. So this is Hesperosaurus, which means western lizard in Greek. And this is a species of herbivorous stegosaurian dinosaur from the Cameroonian age of the Jurassic period about 156 million years ago. So it was first discovered in 1985 by Patrick McSherry on the ranch of S.B. Smith in Johnson County, Wyoming, who found the remains of the stegosaur. And then he actually had difficulty securing the specimen due to the rock matrix. It was quite hard. And he sought out Ronald J. Majors and Jeff Parker from Western Paleontological Laboratories, Inc. And this combined with paleontologist D. Hall of Brigham Young University. It was first thought to be an example of Stegosaurus, but then they actually recognized it was a new species. So the type species Hesperosaurus majorni was named 2001 by Kenneth Carpenter, Clifford Miles, and Karen Colward. And her name means western lizard because it comes from the western US. And the specific name, Opus Majors, who apart from his involvement in the collecting, actually had a cast of it made and put in the Denver Museum of Natural History. So the holotype was found in the Windy Hill member of the Lower Morrison, dating to the early Cambrian about 156 million years ago, and it's actually the oldest known American stegosaur. And it's quite complete. It has a nearly complete skull and much of the skeleton, including hyoid, things like that, so it is quite well known. And the skeleton is also partly articulated and has healed fractures, so it's thought to be actually from an old individual. And then there have been some historic locations that they have looked at some partial skeletons and things like that, looking at them, and there seem to be some other examples, not 100% confirmed yet, but there has been some skeletons found around this historic location, which is quite cool. In Carpenter, they originally interpreted Hesperosaurus as rather basal stegosaur, but actually is found to be more derived, closely related to things like Stegosaurus and Wurosaurus. Very interesting as well. We'll get into that. But there's believed to be, I believe, about 5 individuals of Hesperosaurus, as we'll get into. So Hesperosaurus was quite large for a stegosaur, not as big as Stegosaurus, but got to about 6.5 meters or 21 feet long and weighed about 3.5 metric tons, with some large individuals getting about 5 tons. In 2001, is actually found to be rather basal and was made, up with the relations like Huangosaurus. But a lot of these have now been considered not true, and they actually consider to be much more closely related to Stegosaurus. And there is some people that suggest that this is not a separate species, and they are maybe same as Stegosaurus stenops and things like that. But we won't go too much into that. But Carpenter in 2001 identified 10 plates as part of the holotype that were long and low. So you can see Stegosaurus's ones are a lot more flared out and bigger. These ones are a lot more rounded. And they also got the Thagomisers, very similar to Stegosaurus. And they actually looked at the osteoderms and skinnifications of a Hesperosaurus, which was pretty much identical to those of Stegosaurus, which is quite interesting. And there was actually a study in 2010 that looked into the soft parts with the Victoria specimens, and it showed true impressions of the skin and the sediment and natural casts. And part of the lower flank shows like hexagonal, non-overlapping convex scales, and higher on the flanks there were some larger central scales that up to about 20 by 10 millimeters. So we do have a pretty good idea of what these guys actually looked like in life, which is quite cool. And they actually found a horny sheath on the plate as well. So there's the first direct proof of such sheaths of keratin on the plates of stegosaurs, so that's quite cool there. It helps protect it and provide it actually with a sharp cutting edge, which is quite interesting. And as although the display structure would have been reinforced because the sheath would increase its visual surface, and these could have been quite brightly coloured. So yeah, it is quite cool that we have actual evidence of that now, due to the looking at Hesperosaurus, which helped out quite a bit. But yeah, in 2001, it was first described to be rather basal, and seemed to be related to Daturus, which is a European stegosaur. But it was really like, yeah, this is a pretty limited scope. More extensive phylogenetic analyses actually suggest that it was related to Stegosaurus, and actually suggest there's some later phylogeny that suggests it may have been related to Daturus as well. So it's neither here nor there. But there has been some evidence or some debate whether Hesperosaurus is actually its own species. There was actually a study in 2015 that actually suggested that Hesperosaurus shows sexual dimorphism, with plates, in the quarry with two types, like a taller plates and then long broad plates, which could have been sexual dimorphism between males and females, which is something that they've been questioned, but there's no formal rebuttal. So it's kind of one of those things that it's like, it's cool to think, but we need, more specimens, of course, to prove that. But no, it's another really cool, potential thing that we could learn about these dinosaurs. And I got to say, I really do love seeing this nice Hesperosaurus. Nice to see some more stegosaurs in our lives. And I quite like this guy. He looks really, really pretty. So yeah, we'll let them run off and do their thing. Done by NetRaptor, who always does a great job. So next up, we've got one done by Jojo Chess. Really, really cool one. Let's just make sure that they get out of the way first, because they always like to hang out in front of the hatchery when I want to release something. So let's release these guys. Oh yes, I already warned you. So he told you. So it's blocked by Dinosaur. Of course, that happens. Sorry about that. So here we got Diabloceratops. Let's see if we can find a good one to look at. I'd actually just stick with him. He looks quite nice. So this is Diabloceratops. So Diabloceratops is an extinct genus of centrosaurine ceratopsians, which are like things like Centrosaurus, that lived about 81.4 to 81 million years ago during the later part of the Cretaceous, with what is now Utah in the US. So its discovery is there's only one specimen known, but it's found from the Last Chance Creek member of the Waweep Formation in Kane County, Utah. The specimen is UMNH-VP16699. It was actually collected by Don DeBurks in 2002 at the Last Chance Creek locality of the formation. That came from the campaigning stage, at least the late Cretaceous, which is estimated to be about 81 million years ago. And it consists of a partial skull with a piece of the lower jaw, and the right side being intact, part left of the skull. And then another specimen was discovered years earlier in 1998, but it was not described in 2010, where it is named Diabloceratops, which means demon lizard, or demon face. However, this specimen may not belong to Diabloceratops, as it actually shares features found only in more derived centrosaurines, and research actually suggests more similar to things like Microceratops, Euheniceratops, and Menophyceratops, which is quite interesting. But yeah, these guys were about medium size for a ceratopsian. This one's actually a little bit too big. They grew to about 4.5 meters long, or 15 feet, and weighed about 1.3 metric tons. And was built very similar to most other, ceratopsians. Very round bodies, big heads, round bodies, short tails. Very similar in that regard. It may have had a small nose horn, or perhaps a second horn in front of that. And you can see it had a small horn on the nose, and then you got these really big ones that turn, and then these really tall ones on the frill there. And it's got very long spikes, similar to things like Styracosaurus and Dinosaurs. And it actually is being one of the earliest centrosaurine ceratopsians. Noted that it's a character shared with the more primitive proceratopsid forms. And obviously those big horns kind of gave it the name Diabloceratops, because it's, the demon, which is quite cool. So in terms of its classification, it is actually considered quite basal to the Centrosaurines. It's actually considered very basal before the split into Pseudoceratops. And its close relative, which is almost like the opposite, Macroceratops, is one of its closer relatives. But it is quite early in that group of Centrosaurians. And in terms of the habitat it lived in, it was the wild wheat formation. Has been dated between 82 to 77 million years ago, and the precise date it lived in was about 81 million years ago. During the time this would have lived, the America would have been divided by the Western Interior Seaway, and it was at its widest extent, which almost completely isolated southern Laramidia from the rest of North America. And where these dinosaurs lived, they had lots of lakes, floodplains, and east-flowing rivers. And the Wawip was part of the Grand Staircase, which is a region of sedimentary rock layers that stretch south from Bryce Canyon National Park to Zion National Park and into the Grand Canyon. And the presence of these rapid sedimentation is thought to be indicative of a wet seasonal climate. So in terms of paleofauna it did live with a very interesting assortment of animals, including the Hadrosaur, Astraavus, and Adilophus, some unknown Pachycephalosaurs and Ankylosaurs, also Lythronax. I'm sure you guys heard of Lythronax. And other vertebrates present would have been freshwater fish, rays and sharks, turtles, crocodilians, lungfish. There's also quite a few mammals known from this region, and these would have been more primitive compared to animals from what is now known as the Kaparowitz Formation. There's also trace fossils of crocodilians, but also as well the ornithischians and theropods. So it is likely a very rich formation, and quite cool. With very, very interesting animal we get to talk about. I love Diabloceratops. Another great one by Jojo Chess. Jojo Chess always knocking it out the park. But yeah, really, really cool little guys. I'm definitely a big fan of this guy. So let's let them run off and do their thing. So next up, we've got a big sauropod. So this one's also done by Chocolate. We've got Sauroposeidon. Now that's a really, really cool sauropod. Let's have a look at you. Actually, let your leg. There we are, perfect. So this is Sauroposeidon. And you gotta get it, because it's a sauropod, you gotta get far away to get a good look in. How beautiful is that dinosaur? So this is Sauroposeidon, which means lizard earthquake god, and is named after the Greek god Poseidon. These guys are a genus of sauropod dinosaur known from several incomplete specimens, including a bone bed, and has been found in Oklahoma, Wyoming, and Texas. So the dates of this guy, well, we'll actually get to discovery. So the first fossils of Sauroposeidon are actually four-neck vertebrae found in rural Oklahoma, which is not far from Texas, and a claystone outcrop that dated to about 110 million years ago, which was in the early Cretaceous period around the Aptian and Albion. So that's kind of when they've been found, 118 to 110 million years ago. And these vertebrae were discovered in 1994 in the Antlers Formation in Dakota County, Oklahoma, by dog trainer Bobby Cross and Naturalist Museum as well. They kind of came and grabbed it in 1994. And initially, these fossils actually believed to be simply too large to be the remains of an animal, and due to the state of preservation, they're believed to be tree trunks. And in fact, they are the longest vertebrae known in dinosaurs. And thus, the vertebrae were stored until 1999, until Matt Wadle and managed to analyze them, and then published it as Sauroposeidon, fossils, which is, the Earthshaker. And the specific species means perfect before the end. So it was probably the last and most specialized sauropod known in North America during the early Cretaceous. So yeah, a very interesting history. But then in 2022, numerous other sauropods have been found over the decades under various different names, and then were kind of lumped into Sauroposeidon, things such as Pycnonemosaurus and Pyrocolus, which is found in Texas and also Oklahoma. Palaxiosaurus was actually, yeah. So a lot of them were thought to be different genera, but then were found to be more similar to Sauroposeidon, which is quite interesting. So the original Sauroposeidon found was actually four articulated mid-cervical vertebrae, and the vertebrae were extremely elongated, and the largest one being about 1.4 meters, or about 4'6", making it the longest sauropod neck vertebrae on record. And examining the bones actually showed that they're honeycombed. So most sauropods, they do have hollow neck vertebrae, which allows them to be very strong but also very light. Very similar to birds, which makes their necks lighter and easier to lift. The cervical ribs are actually very large as well. So there's the ribs that come off the neck vertebrae, with the longest one being about 3.242 meters, or about 11 feet, which is 18% longer than those of Giraffatitan and even Mamenchisaurus. So most kind of estimates of Sauroposeidon size are based on comparisons of Giraffatitan, though it's not actually that closely related to them. These days, we actually think there's something different. Was based on the one that's from the Berlin National Museum, which is the most complete brachiosaur known. And the neck length has been estimated about 11.25 to 12 meters, or 37-39 feet, compared to a neck length of 9 meters of the Giraffatitan there, which is not believed to be an adult. But Sauroposeidon is also believed to raise its head between 16.5 to 18 meters above the ground, which is high as a six-story building. And its shoulder height was estimated to be 6 to 7 meters, based on the interpretation as the animals are brachiosaurid, and its total length would have been about 27 meters, or about 89 to 34 meters, so 89 to 112 feet. The mass of Sauroposeidon is estimated to be about 40 to 60 tons, and while the vertebrae are about 23 to 33% longer than Giraffatitan's, they are only about 10 to 50% larger in diameter, so they probably would have had a larger body and then kind of like a more gracile neck, which is quite interesting. So these guys would have quite slim necks. That would have been quite long, but also quite light compared to things like Apatosaurus with very much thicker, longer necks. But yeah, the interesting thing as well, they are not. A lot of this is based when it was more brachiosaurids. So these guys are a little bit more later in the family tree. They are a type of titanosaur like Simolestes, which are a group of titanosauriforms that are more close related to Titanosauria proper than Brachiosauridae. So it's kind of on the way to being, a titanosaur, but they're not quite titanosaurs yet. So they're not a brachiosaurid. They're a close relative. They're kind of a little bit later. But yeah, anyway, we'll talk about the paleoecology. So sauropods, which included, the largest terrestrial animals of all time, were very successful. And then you had the titanosaurs replace the diplodocids and brachiosaurids from the Jurassic, and then titanosaurs pretty much took over in most regards. And these guys would have been, these large giants. And between these periods, actually, in America, the early, basically after the early Cretaceous, large sauropods in America basically went extinct. And the only real sauropod to come back from that was at the end of the Cretaceous, you had Alamosaurus, whether it's a South American descendant or Eurasian descendant. I'm not sure where that stands on that, but basically after Sauroposeidon they went extinct in America until Alamosaurus came at the end of the Cretaceous around the Maastrichtian. So that's quite interesting there. So Sauroposeidon itself would have lived around the Gulf of Mexico, in Oklahoma, and has been preserved in places like the Antlers Formation. At this time as well, there would have been the West Interior Seaway, which would have divided North America into two. Most of the habitats it lived in would have been more tropical, subtropical forests, coastal swamps, bayous, lagoons, actually believed to be more similar to modern-day Louisiana. And there were few predators, of course, that would prey on Sauroposeidon, but juveniles would have been prey for Acrocanthosaurus, Deinonychus, and it would have shared that environment with Astrodon and Tenontosaurus and some really cool amphibians and crocodilians and fish. So it would have lived in a very rich environment. But yeah, really, really cool one, and nice to see a Sauroposeidon. It has got the wrong feet, though. I'm going to mention that. It hasn't got the wrong feet. It's got the JP feet. 2 extra digits, and that should be very much like a fleshy horseshoe. But yeah, I do like the anatomy of the rest of it regardless. You can see that really, really long neck it has, and that long tail. It looks really, really nice. I'm a big fan of this Sauroposeidon. Nice to see a good Sauroposeidon in the game. Looks really, really nice, so we'll let them run off and do their thing. That's all herbivores done. So next up, we're going to have to early release these ones, but that's okay. We have got Simolestes, which is a really cool animal there. So let's put them in here. I'm sorry, if I release them, they'll get stuck in the hatchery, so I've got to airlift them out. Luckily, it shouldn't take too long.
Asset transportation complete. Asset in transit. Delivery complete.
There we are. And we'll get a good look at you. So this is Simolestes. Oh. Where'd he go? There he is. So this is Simolestes. Looks really, really nice, doesn't he? So Simolestes, which means snub-nosed thief, is an extinct pliosaur genus that lived in the middle late Jurassic. And the type specimen actually is almost complete but crushed stone skull. And almost complete skeleton. Oh, that happened again. Dating back to, and it's actually diagnostic to Simolestes vorax, which is dating back to the Calavian of the Oxford Clay Formation in England. And actually, there may be genus also known from India with a different species, Indicus. And then there's also Kalanski, which actually was another species that was named into a new genus, Dinosaurs, in 2023. So Simolestes is really interesting because it has like a short but quite wide skull where, they get the name snub-nosed face. And it was built to resist torsion when hunting. And the largest specimens of Simolestes vorax reached about 15 feet or about 4.6 meters long, with a head-to-body ratio, if you apply the head-to-body ratio of, Liopleurodon, so it's actually quite comparable, probably a little bit smaller than Liopleurodon. Like most pliosaurs, they actually would have had salt-secreting glands that would have allowed them to maintain their salt balance in their body and drink seawater. Also, recent studies into plesiosaur locomotion indicate that, like other plesiosaurs, Simolestes would have had a unique kind of bowel plan for movement, which is quite different than most other ones. So they'd actually use, their front flippers first. In terms of their feeding habits, it is unclear, but the current consensus, though, that these guys were primarily tethophagus, which means they'd eat things like belemnites, squids, and ammonites. And it's possible that Simolestes was ecologically separated from other genera such as Liopleurodon and Pachycrasis, so they may have hunted deeper waters at night, as cephalopods often exhibit diurnal feed cycles, where spending daylight in deeper, safe waters and then rising at night to feed. So they may have been either used diving into deeper waters or coming out at night to avoid competition with other species of pliosaurs, which is a cool hypothesis, but considering the torsion, they probably might have been a little bit more adapted for, hard shelled prey. So in terms of its relatives, it is believed to be related to things like Liopleurodon, Pliosaurus, and Pycnonemosaurus, so it's a pliosaur. So a little bit later in, the kind of group. But yeah, quite cool. So there's Vorax, which is this one, and then there's Indicus, which is believed to be from India, but it could be either another genus or maybe just lumped into the species. Really don't know quite yet. But yeah, quite cool. Do quite love these guys. I love like the face of these guys. As I mentioned, it is known from a quite complete skull. So you can see they've got like that very snub-nosed face. Big teeth going on. It looks really, really cool. So yeah, we'll let them run off and do their things. Oh, I don't know what happened there. That's alright. Anyway, let's let them run off and do their thing. Next up, we've got one, if you're familiar with sea monsters, we have got Odobenocetops. So a really cool little species here. Actually, see if we can find one that's oh, this one looks nah. I'll have a look at you. I like this one. So this is Odobenocetops. So Odobenocetops is an extinct genus of small-toothed whale that actually is known from Chile and Peru. Its fossils are found in Miocene-aged marine strata of the Barrier Glacier and Pisco Formation. And there's two different species. There's Peruviensis and Leptodon. So the history and naming of this guy is quite interesting. Well, we'll actually talk about what it's known for. So it's actually mostly known for its large asymmetrical tusks. So you can see it's got this kind of one side is very much pronounced and then, the one small. And it's typically only seen in the males. The females have symmetrical tusks. So these tusks are thought to be sexual dimorphics. So the long tusk is only really in the males and the females have two similar sized ones. And the holotype is one, the elongated right tusk is broken, which actually means the precise length is conspicuous, but it's thought to be a total length of about 1.5 meters or something like that. And while these tusks are reminiscent of the tusks that you're seeing in modern narwhals, it's actually a great example of convergent evolution. So they, we don't know exactly what they were for, but they were thought to be too fragile for combat and thought to be something that, maybe for non-violent social role, or these sheaths may have been used to act like walruses, to help find food and dig for stuff in the the sediment. So we'll talk about the history and naming. We'll talk about that. So the first fossil finds was a single skull found in the 1990s in the Pisco Formation in Peru, which although thought to correlate with the earliest Pliocene, was actually found to be in the Miocene. So there was a few specimens skull described, and it was described as Odobenocetops peruviensis as a type species, and then more substantial material was found that was thought to represent a female, but then it was actually thought to be a second younger species of Leptodon, which is quite interesting as well. And Odobenocetops means Odin, Odon, which means tooth, and burrow means walk. So it's basically the walking tooth whale, or the whale that walks on its teeth. And it actually reflects it as actually thought to be quite similar to the walrus. So these guys weren't quite that big. They had a body length estimated between 3 to 4 meters, or 9 to 13 feet, and reached a mass similar to modern narwhals between 800 to kilograms to a ton. And the skull itself is large, about 46 centimeters or 18 inches, and has quite characteristic profile. It's quite very interesting skull. Its anterior-most part is separated in strong concussion, and the skull of modern whales actually show quite a variety of adaptations to these lives, aquatic life, but it's actually quite interesting. It's actually unique to how the skull actually is reversed, the telescoped condition, and it's actually thought that they would have lacked a melon, which is, or at least they only had a vestigial melon, which is the big lump of fat that most whales have these days, especially toothed whales that allow them to echolocate. And the bony nares is actually located near the tip of the skull, in contrast to the blowholes of whales and dolphins on the top of the skull, so it's a little bit different as well. They're also reduced there, and their tympanic bones are similar to that of other dolphins, but yeah, there's very interesting things as well. There's also been the premaxilla as well as covered in important insertion points for facial musculature, which is believed to interpreted as a strong upper lip or even like whiskers, very similar to modern walruses. And the skull of Leptodon differs as well. Its palate is much deeper, longer and wider. Being a slightly younger species, it's probably more thing as well. It's more of a U shape compared to a V shape, and the apex of the snout is more massive. And these bones are actually seen in the rostral and penile bones are similar to seeing things like tigers, elephant shrews, pigs, moles, and tapirs, which suggests a strong upper lip, which they would have been great if they were, feeding very similar to walruses at the bottom of the, at the feeders, which is quite cool. And in a lot of ways, they actually have an inner ear and actually have a neck more similar to those of belugas. So they would have had increased head and neck mobility, which probably would have really helped them to forage on the seafloor. We'll get into that. So their tusks as well, in addition to be unique, Odobenocetops is most easily distinguished because of its tusks, as their pair of asymmetrical tusks, which is made of dentine. So what's very interesting as well, they are directed backwards at about a 60-degree angle, and since the tusks is only known from a single occipitation in narwhal, they're also asymmetrical. So narwhals have asymmetrical tusks, so they have one small one, one really big one. However, in narwhals, the tusks is implanted in the left maxilla, while the tusk in Odobenocetops actually originates from the right premaxilla. And this is actually a great example of convergent evolution. So two whales independently evolving tusks in two different ways, potentially for the same reason, but we don't know. The holotype of Odobenocetops, both tusks are incomplete, but it's estimated the lower right tusk would have been about 45 to 55 centimeters, or 18 to 22 centimeters in length, with the left tusk being smaller, about 20 centimeters, or about 7 inches. And following the discovery of Leptodon, they actually speculated that both tusks could have attained larger sizes in individuals. There could be quite a bit of variation there. And there's actually a skull that suggested that it has two smaller tusks, or no tusks, that would have been, shorter and may have been sexual dimorphism, because since female narwhals don't have tusks but males do, it's very similar that male Odobenocetops would have had these large tusks while the females did not. And the holotype of the youngest specimen is actually had both tusks in situ, with the right one being needle-like and about 1.3 meters, 3.5 meters, or about 4.5 feet, with the other one being 3.6 feet as well, and the left tusk only being about 25 centimeters or 9.8 inches. So it's quite interesting. So we know they had one really big tusk, one really small tusks. And given these tusks' slenderness, they're actually thought to be quite fragile. Actually considered them maybe, and also is considered to be an argument against being held across their body. Would have been angled slightly downward, and due to the fact that tusks additionally project sideways towards them, they could have lowered their head even further, which would have been helpful, obviously, with foraging. So Odobenocetops was an early member of the dolphin family, or superfamily. It is actually more closely related to things like narwhals and dolphins, but with tusks protruding towards the rear of the body rather than the front. So Muson actually originated Odobenocetops today is similar group to Monodontidae, which is the group that includes belugas and narwhals as well. And the relation between the two species actually may be those of sister taxa rather than successive species. So there may have been, even though one's younger, they may have been. So the Leptodon, which is the younger one, had a more derived palate than its older relative, yet retained a basal melon that was heavily reduced and proved said it was a derived trait. That suggests it may have actually lost a melon, or like early, it may have kept a small melon since Odobenocetops wouldn't have had a big melon. But yeah, interesting, we'll keep talking about that melon. So the melon is a very important fatty sensory organ that is associated with echolocation in toothed whales, seemed to be absent in Odobenocetops, but the anatomy of the ear seems to show that they were capable of ultrasonic hearing. So they would have been able to potentially pick up on things, but they wouldn't be able to echolocate. They would have incapable of like the very great echolocation or complex echolocation that most modern toothed whales have. And they would have relied on potentially good binocular vision, and which would probably be more useful, going around the seafloor. So they gave up the echolocation that modern toothed whales had, and was basically had more better vision to be able to see. And the Leptodon, which is a younger species, is different. Its eyes are actually still more dorsal, but the shape of the orbits do not actually support the idea it had well-developed binocular vision. So we don't know exactly how good its vision was. And there's actually thought to be, even though the melon was absent, it actually seemed to be somewhat developed. And such a small melon would have, so they would have had a small melon potentially. It would have been reduced relative to other toothed whales, so they would have had a small melon, potentially would have done some echolocation, but it would have been nowhere near as good as modern things, but they would have had better binocular vision. And all this suggests that two species varied their approach in foraging, with O. peruviensis with its vestigial non-existent melon-related vision, which is extremely well developed compared to other cetaceans. O. leptodon would have had much poor binocular vision and actually a small melon, which would have been helpful for hunting through echolocation. So it's a little bit of niche petitioning, a little bit of adaptation, or it would have been something to help them survive. And another sense that they potentially could have had would actually be used through touch by the presence of vibrisserae, which are sensitive hairs that can be seen on the faces of modern walruses and seals. And they may be present. The later of a small fragment on the sheath of tusk may actually correspond with the idea. And they've actually been found, there's some toothed whales with tactile hair that can be typically vestigial, and it's actually can be found in Amazon river dolphins and mysticetes as well. And maybe also a great example of convergent evolution, similar to like modern dugongs. But yeah, there's been a lot of debate about the function of their tusks. With, as I mentioned, their tusks being rather fragile and broken. They're not sure exactly what they've been used for. The fragile nature, which means they were not used in any way that required them to like dig or anything. One idea they've been used to, used to establish hierarchies, but yeah, they've probably not been fighting too much. And in 2020, they actually looked into the pros and cons of various potential uses. They're looking at them using as a ballast, or using them to climb onto land, which obviously would have been very silly. Sea ice was also because it used to help climb onto sea ice, which obviously wouldn't happen because where it lived it was quite warm. Social functions is kind of hard to prove. Their possible function had been explored in the same publications. They would have also been hydrofoils, which would not have been very useful for these slow swimming species as well. And two of the hypotheses regarding the function of the sheath pretty much lack any direct evidence to the contrary. So the potentially skin attached to the sheaths may have been helpful for feeding, and there's also several advantages we don't know. But we really don't know what these teeth were for. There's a lot of hypotheses, but we really don't know. But the range of motion as well, as we mentioned, like belugas, Odobenocetops would have had very flexible necks and faces, so they would have very flexible necks. So this would allow them to push their head down like when swimming, so which would be very useful for a seed bottom feeder, or eating very similar to walruses and on the seafloor and the sediment. So that would have been very useful for this species. And while the neck would flex and bring the tusks up while swimming, during foraging, the densely built skull and tusk would keep the head down, so they would be able to keep the head down. And it actually shows a lot of very capable evolutions of things like dugons and other sirens, or sirenians, that are capable of swimming parallel to the seafloor because they are obviously feeding on seagrass. And the range of motion is actually a little bit more, at least 29% greater than belugas, so they would have had quite flexible necks, which would have been very helpful, for feeding on the seafloor. And in terms of forage and feeding, they share many of the actually characteristics of modern walruses, and due to the similarities, the great example of convergent evolution, they likely would have lived a similar lifestyle. So the powerful musculature of its lower jaws would have allowed for good suction, and the lower jaws were likely toothless. The strong musculature could not have allowed for chewing or grinding. Instead, they would have been suction feeders, potentially. They would have actually used its upper lip to grab various bivalves and suck it out of their shells as well. So that's a great way they could have been feeding and eat the soft parts of bivalves, which is quite cool. And there might have been some slight differences with other species. So Leptodon would actually have more modified or pronounced anatomy, would allow them to suck up mollusks that was even greater in the older species. And regardless, both species would have been considered to be bottom feeders, or in the sediment, eating mollusks like modern walruses. And the asymmetrical plate was also inclined more towards the left to compensate for the massive right tusks, and suggested that asymmetry would have been responsible. And rather, already established preferences of the development of the tusks, and a preference of one particular side is actually not unheard of. So it's possible that the length of the tusk may be because just a preference. Like grey whales and stuff like that would prefer feeding on their right or left side. And all this combined kind of suggests that Odobenocetops was a species that was a bottom-feeding molluscivore, feeding on various bivalves and crustaceans, with the use of echolocation or exceptional vision, and possibly with the assistance of tactile hair. They would have been foraging with their head down and their tusks parallel to the sediment, while the body would help, basically keep it stable. The tail fluke would have helped keep this position while providing propulsion, while the forelimbs would have been stabilizers. And once a suitable piece of prey was detected, Odobenocetops would have actually used suction feeding, so a powerful jet of water using its mouth, which is the ability both seen in belugas and orcas, excavating the target from the sediment, and would likely used its powerful upper lip to grasp and hold the invertebrate, and utilize the complex suction feeding. They were able to suck out the soft parts with its tongue and get rid of the shell. So it's a very interesting species and quite cool. But yeah, Odobenocetops is a very interesting animal from a very interesting formation. It's from the Miocene Pisco formation. which was a coastal environment with calm, shallow waters. It's quite warm and is quite a great diversity of whales, including cetothares, which were like small whales, like the pygmy right whale, rock whales, different types of seals, beak whales, porpoises, multiple species of sperm whales, including the giant leviathan. Other things would have been the marine sloth Thalassocnus, Megalodon, the shark, the 2 species of marine gharials, and various species of seals and penguins. And there's lots of species of bivalves in this area. It would have been great prey for Odobenocetops. And some of these species would have been competition or predators, especially things like Megalodon and Leviathan, and some of those predatory raptorial sperm whales would have been great predators for these guys. And they're also known from the late Miocene Cerebellina Formation in Chile, which has very other similar species like Thalassocnus and seals and sperm whales and things like that. So not too different in that way. But yeah, quite cool. I love Odobenocetops. Nice to see this guy finally. And if you guys know you're walking with monsters, I'm not walking with monsters, it's walking with sea monsters. The one with Nigel Marvin, you'll be very familiar with the species. You can see the difference. One's got long and one's short. But yeah, really, really cool. Definitely a big fan of these guys. So I'll let them run off and do their thing. So next up, we've got another one done by Netraptor. I've got to say the Simolestes was actually done by Chocolate, and Odobenocetops are done by Hushquack Trees. They've both done a great job of that. But anyway, we'll carry on. So this one's done by Netraptor. We've got Fukuivenator, which is a really cool one. So we've got another cool mod from Netraptor. Netraptor, always killing it. So Netraptor made us Fukuivenator, which is the hunter of Fukuia preference. These guys are extinct genus of Menoraptor theropod from the early Cretaceous of Japan. So the type species is Fukuivenator paradoxus, which was named in 2016 by Yoshizama Zijing, Masaris Tabata, and a bunch of Japanese people I cannot pronounce. The generic name combines the reference of the Fuki prefaces with the Latin venator, which means basically the Fuki hunter, and the name refers to being a paradox. I guess it's kind of like because it's got a bunch of weird traits as we'll get into. The rocks of which it is found in August in 2007, belonging to the Kidani Formation, which is about Borromean or Abdian in stage. So it's about 127 to 115 million years in age. And the holotype consists of a partial skeleton and with a skull, and the skeleton of X. paradoxus is currently the most complete non-avian dinosaur fossil found in Japan, with the remains including about 150 bones and bone fragments. They were not found in articulation, recovered from an area about 50 by 50 centimeters. So the estimated length of Fukuivenator would have been about 2.4 meters, about 8 feet long, and estimated about 25 kilograms. And the classification is what really makes this guy interesting. So the classification of a Fukuivenator, there's lots of anatomy that is very kind of combines both primitive and advanced traits of Saurosaurs, which includes Menoraptorans, Tyrannosaurs, and things like that. And it was first considered a primitive member of the group Menoraptoriformes, which is actually closely related to things like ornithomimids, Menoraptorans, and Ortholestes. And several similarities of Dromaeosaurs have actually showed to be potentially cases of convergent evolution. And as 2021, it's actually considered a basal member of the Therizinosaurs, which is quite interesting. So as I mentioned, it's kind of been taxonomically all over the place, which is quite interesting. And another close and added Miracham is actually suggested to be the closest. So it actually is believed to be related or more closely related to Therizinosaurs than most other things at the moment. So that's quite interesting. And based on its long neck, heterodont, or multiple different types of teeth, as you can kind of see there. Let's see if you can get a look at the teeth. It's got multiple different types of teeth, or heterodont dentition, so different teeth. It probably actually, they probably foremost of which actually the flattened outer edges. The authors actually suggested that it may not have been a pure carnivore, and it would have actually been likely adapted for a herbivorous or at least omnivorous diet, which actually does make sense considering it is related to Therizinosaurs, which were herbivores, so it potentially could have been becoming more herbivorous. as time went on. So, yeah, another really cool little guy there. Another great Netraptor mod. Another one by Netraptor to finish us off. We know we always like to finish off with a large theropod. We have got Pycnonemosaurus, or Pycnonemosaurus. Look at you, because I like the colors on you. Really, really nice mod here. So this is Pycnonemosaurus, which means dense forest lizard. So these guys are a genus of carnivorous theropod that belong to the family Abelisauridae. So it's related to things like Majungasaurus and Carnotaurus. And it's found in the Upper Cretaceous red columnar sandstones of the Carena de Bonjaman Formation in Brazil, and lived during the late Campanian to early Maastrichtian and during the late Cretaceous. So the type species is Pycnonemosaurus nevasi, which was named scientifically described by Keller and Campos in 2002. The unknown specimen is found from the formation I mentioned, and actually come visit from a farm named Rocaldo in the state of Mato Grosso and collected several dinosaur bones. And the most important specimen was the found of the incomplete specimen, or the skeleton of a larger Beipiaosaurus, which is this guy, and actually found near large Titanosaur sauropod bones. And the name comes from the Greek word dense, so Pycnonemosaurus means dense, Nemos means like pastures or woodlands, and Sauros means lizard, which is quite interesting. And the naming was an allusion of the Mato Grosso state where the remains are found. And the specific name honors the late Dr. Ledo Bastina Nevas, who passed away in 2000, who encouraged the pursuit of paleontology studies, particularly of Alexander Kalner. So that's quite a cool little bit of history there. So quite interesting as well. It is quite fragmentary, with no elements were well preserved, and the bone surface was well abraded because it was exposed to the sun and the elements. The type specimen is housed in the Earth Science Museum of Rio de Janeiro. It consists of 5 incomplete teeth, parts of 7 quarter vertebrae, the distal part of the pubis, the right tibia, and the distal articulation of the right fibula. So it's not known from much. However, it seems to be actually somewhat unlike related Beipiaosaurs such as Fukuivenator, so that's interesting as well. And the type specimen is actually believed to be a subadult or a mature individual, with initial sizes actually putting it between 6 to 7 meters and just over a ton or 1.2 tons. But later analyses actually found it was much larger, about 8.9 meters or about 29 feet. And these current estimates actually make Pycnonemosaurus the largest described Beipiaosaur at a length of 9 meters and about 3.6 tons. So it's the biggest of all the Beipiaosaurs. So in terms of classification, it is believed to be in the group of called Phyllosauria, related to a bunch of really interesting and weird Beipiaosaurs from South America, such as Lulucan and Fukuivenator, and then its later relatives would have been things like Carnotaurus and Abelisaurus and things like that. And in terms of paleoecology, is the best known Beipiaosaur from Brazil, with most theropod material being quite rare, other than teeth and footprints. As I mentioned, it's found from the lower is one of the most informative countries concerning the lower Cretaceous. But this guy actually comes from the Campanian and Maastrichtian, who have been reassigned to the Campanian-aged Carena de Bonjaman Formation, and is believed to be a semi-arid climate with intermediate parts of alluvial fans, and was thought to be a predator preying on titanosaurs and other large herbivores in the area. Its teeth are quite small but yet sharp, and it's believed to have been hold struggling prey as the Beipiaosaur ripped them apart, which is quite cool. But yeah, another really, really cool mod. I do love seeing like updates and cool things, especially from Netraptor, who's always killing it and giving us some cool species. See, I do love these guys. I love the colors too. A really, really nice mod. So, yeah, we'll keep carrying on. So I think this is a great place to end the video. So yeah, thank you, Chocolate, thank you, Netraptor, Jojo Chess, Hasquark Tree, and Netraptor. All you guys have really done a wonderful job with these mods and give us some really interesting species to talk about. But yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys like and subscribe, always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified below anything. So if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.